Well, let me ask you something that I've never really seen in print, but that I've sensed from a lot of students that I've talked to, and even some colleagues. They tend to think of tolerance and open-mindedness as virtues, quite reasonably, but that means they think of belief and commitment as something like an intellectual vice. And so when it comes to religion, their attitude is something like, look, religious people are, they actually know what they believe, and they have these strong opinions, and I actually think it's virtuous not to have strong opinions. And often this gets coupled with noticing various forms of religious intolerance in Christianity, but in other religions too, and saying, see, I told you so, that's what it leads to. So how do you respond to that worry that it's just, in effect, a virtue not to make up your mind about anything?
Yeah, you will know, and it's a famous quote, G.K. Chesterton, I think, saying that when humans give up believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And there is a sense in which open-mindedness can lead you just to wander around with all sorts of odd ideas sloshing to and fro in your mind, which are uncritically held for a moment and then put to one side, and something else comes in. And that is actually the way to spend your whole life as a very shallow thinker and probably a very shallow human being, because there's the winds of culture which come this way and that, and they can blow through your mind and keep you entertained, and whether it's through news channels or whatever, and you won't actually get a grip on anything. The other parallel great line from G.K. Chesterton is that the purpose of an open mind is like the purpose of an open mouth, which is to shut it again on something solid. That, yeah, okay, have an open mind, but then if somebody presents you with something for which there is good warrant, something which has good evidence, call it a fact if you like, though the word fact has problems attached to it, as you as a logical philosopher will know, when something comes along which really is solid and there and so on, you don't do yourself or the world or anybody any favors by saying, well, maybe, well, let's have a think about that, but let's not decide too quickly. In most of the things that mean most to people, things like beauty and love and wisdom and so on, there is a moment when you have to say yes to something and have to stake your life on it and have to go with it and stick with it. And you might be wrong. Life is full of risk. But if you never, ever do that, you will, as I say, waft through life in and out of relationships, in and out of possibilities, without ever really getting very far down that line. So that the difficulty then, I think, is that the ideal of tolerance is a sort of Enlightenment parody of the Christian virtue of love. And what tolerance does is it separates you, because I can tolerate you, the other side of the room. I can tolerate somebody the other side of the street. I may wave at you or I may not, but you do your thing, I do mine. That's fine. But that's not the same as love. And what I would say is that love is actually hard, and when you see what love means in Christian theology at least, it is very, very demanding. It means going out of your way to think into the situation of the other person, to see what they need, and to do your best to help meet that need. And in the early church, the early century, the reason people became Christians in the 2nd and 3rd century, when the Romans were trying to stamp it out as hard as they could, was not because of great ideas being passed from one great brain to another, Tertullian or Irenaeus or whoever. It was because very ordinary people in villages and towns were doing this thing which they called agape, love, where they were caring for the poor, whether or not it was their poor, where they were caring for the sick, whether or not it was their sick. And people said, we've never seen anything like this before. And that's love, and tolerance is the attempt to sort of get a shadowy version of that without any of the moral effort. And so it seems to me that we need again to reframe the question, and then to say, yes, of course, some religious people are horribly intolerant because they use religion as a way of doing something with their neuroses. And that's often what happens, that people who need to cling on to something that they've just picked up from a preacher or a book or a bit of religious, teaching, whatever. And maybe there are some bits of some religions which do seem to encourage that, but there are all sorts of human foibles which then sort of batten onto those things and abuse them, if you like. But actually, holding that up and saying, there you are, that's what religions do, that is the classic argument of the so-called new atheists, the Dawkins and Hitchens and people. And one of the things we've been trying to do in the UK recently is to point out that, in fact, if you look at the people who volunteer to go and serve cups of tea to the visitors who come to visit people in the prisons, if you look at the people who volunteer to go and drive trucks to take needed supplies to people in the mountains of Serbia or wherever it was a few years ago, again and again and again, those people are Christians. There was an item on the news just yesterday as I was driving to the airport, that we now have quite serious poverty in bits of the UK, and a phenomenon which I didn't know in my youth has sprung up, which is food banks. Now, maybe you have them here as well, I don't know. But I think it's something like 95% of the food banks in the UK are run by the churches. And you know, that's not having much attention drawn to it. I think it is now, but there's something going on there where if you say, oh, look at these religious people, they're so intolerant. Yeah, they're so intolerant that they're not prepared to tolerate poverty, and they want to do something to help the people in that position. Whereas the tolerant will say, good luck to you, you know, get on with it, and ain't going to happen.